before we get to scripture reading, I wanted to share we have a very special guest preacher this morning, and who's not really a guest. He is a part of the family here at Bright City, Chad Wenger. We are very excited to have Chad sharing with us this morning. Chad, you may know Chad from his sweet jazz music that he plays on the saxophone in the worship team occasionally. But he and his wife, Michelle, and their 3 girls have been with us here at Bright City for about 2.5 years and have already been such a gift to our community in so many ways. They lead a ministry at UNC Chapel Hill. But before moving here, Chad and Michelle had actually planted a church in Pennsylvania. And so they come with lots of experience, lots of wisdom, lots of grace for the church plant life. And so we deeply appreciate that. But we also know that Chad has a lot of experience preaching and teaching. And so although we wanted to give him some rest, we decided he's had enough rest. It's time for him to get back in the saddle. And so we're excited to have Chad preach for us this morning. So after the scripture reading, be sure to give Chad a warm welcome.
Thank you. I'm always very uncomfortable with that, so thank you for that. So good morning, Bright City. I just want to thank you so much for inviting me to be able to share with you this morning. It's just a tremendous honor to be able to preach and teach at my home church, and just really feels special. So about 3 years ago, our family packed up our home in South Central Pennsylvania, and we left our family and it's a close-knit community to move here to South Durham so that we could serve students at the University of North Carolina. So go Heels. Are there really any other schools in the area anyways? But anyways, this was a huge move for us. We left a community that we had known our entire lives, and essentially we're starting life again in our middle ages here. So finding a church for our family became one of the most important things for us as we moved. And one of the first places we visited was right here at Bright City. And we were blessed by the authentic worship, just the great teaching every week, and the warm sense of community. Additionally, we just loved worshiping in a movie theater and being able to each week transfer like what is a secular space into a sacred space. And that just feels like a blessing and privilege to be able to do. And so we were encouraged by that. So I just want to thank you for welcoming our family here to this community and for providing us a home as we moved. It means more than you can imagine. So my wife, Michelle, I'll show a picture of our family. My wife, Michelle, many of you may know her. She plays piano, is on the prayer team. We've been married for 19 years, which is absolutely amazing, especially since the first time that I asked her out on a date to a really nice romantic evening of bowling. She showed up, unbeknownst to me, she showed up with her sister, which I'm not like a relationship expert, but I don't think that's a really good sign on your first date. But anyways, here we are 19 years later with 3 amazing daughters, Jordan, Kylie, and Taya, and then we have 1 dog. There's a picture of our dog, Callie, and I'm pretty sure the dog has a better life than any of us. The dog lays around like sleeping for about 18 hours a day, like it just worked a double shift at the quarry yesterday. And then when it gets up off the couch and stretches, everybody congratulates the dog like it just did something amazing. And it's like, great stretch, Callie. You did such a good job stretching. Meanwhile, when I get up off the couch and stretch, everybody's like, get it together, old man. It's gross. So speaking of stretch, allow me to tell a story that will hopefully fit with our sermon today. So as I said, we spent most of our lives in South Central Pennsylvania, about 20 minutes from Hershey, where chocolate was born. And so while the area is growing significantly, it has its roots in more of a rural setting. In fact, Hershey set up their factory there because that was the place he found the best cows. Not that it's a competition with North Carolina, but just so you know. And so because of this, most weddings that I've been to, that I've officiated, that I've been a part of, have been in these converted barns. So these barns that have been like glammed up to become wedding venues. And I like it. I like it like this because there's a simplicity and there's a beauty to that I like. I'm not an overly fancy guy, and so something like this is much more in my comfort zone. Give me a barn, like a few carrot sticks for an appetizer, some yard games, and a burrito for dinner, and I'm going to say that you had a fantastic wedding. In fact, I can actually be a little uncomfortable when things are overly extravagant or fancy. I mean, I buy my clothes at Sam's Club, for Pete's sake. I'm not even like Costco fancy. But a few years ago, we were invited to this wedding near Philadelphia, and it was right on the Delaware River. And it was just beautiful. It was extravagant. It was like more than anything I'd ever been to. It was fancy. I had to wear a suit, and I'm like showing the place around to Michelle like I was the one that paid for it all. But the reality is, like, my mouth was open the whole time. I didn't likely belong there, but thankfully it was a relative, and so I got invited anyways. But throughout the entire afternoon, it just felt like it was way more than what I deserved or what I was used to. In fact, they had 21 different appetizers, and I remember this because I kept telling Michelle, they have 21, and my only goal for that entire afternoon was to eat all 21 appetizers. And I remember they even had like things that came out of the sea, like seafood that wasn't from Long John Silver. And so I was just like, wow, this is incredible. This is super fancy. But it was extravagant. I'm a little bit uncomfortable, but I also was just enjoying the whole thing. So this morning, we're going to look at this story that I think is very extravagant in many ways. It goes above and beyond what's needed. So we're going to continue this series on the book of John, which we're calling The Word Made Real. And today, the text that we're going to look at is the one that Erica just read for us, this wedding at Cana, where Jesus turns water into wine. And I've always enjoyed this story, and this week I was trying to figure out, like, why do I like this story so much? So one reason, I think, is because this is the only miracle of Jesus that we read about that did not meet, like, a human condition need. In other words, like blindness or lameness or a physical ailment or demon possession. But rather, the supernatural miracle seems to be centered around resolving social embarrassment. Which, based on some of the stories that I've already told this morning, you can see why this would be near and dear to my heart. The other question that I asked myself about this story is, why would John include it here? Like, why start off this gospel, or towards the beginning, with this supernatural miracle about water being turned into wine? Towards the end of the gospel, John gives us a clear purpose onto why he wrote this book. In John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, it says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So everything that John is recording is so that those of us who are reading this gospel now and throughout history and to come would believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, we would have life. And one of the first things he does is to record this miracle of Jesus where he turns water into wine, or depending on your background and where you grew up, water into grape juice. Therefore, it begs the question of why include this miracle at the beginning of this gospel to prolong a party. And the other thing that I think about this story is it almost feels like Jesus is a bit in the background. He interacts with Mary, he tells the servants what to do, but it's almost like the bulk of the people at the party aren't fully aware of the magnitude of what they've witnessed and what they've been a part of that day. And it almost leaves me with a sense of like wonder about, are there things that Jesus has done in my life or in the lives of those around me where I haven't actually fully realized that it was his hand at work? And so in many ways, the reason I love this story so much is it leaves me with this sense of wonder and awe at who Jesus is. And it builds my faith, and it shows me his character and his love and his presence for those who are there that day. So this morning, we're going to examine different people that were a part of this story, that were a part of this party. And I want us to see the extravagant nature of Jesus. And I'll define the extravagant as something that goes beyond usual, something beyond necessary, or something beyond reasonable. And so as we look at each of these encounters, I hope that they will teach us what happens then as we encounter Jesus here today. So the first person that we're going to look at in the story is Mary, the mother of Jesus. And I'll say that her encounter leads to extraordinary or extravagant confidence and trust. So based on the depth of the concern that she has at this wedding is running low on wine, it likely indicates that she knows this couple really well. Perhaps the couple was a close family friend or a relative of hers. And so when she finds that the wine is run out at the wedding, she goes directly to Jesus. And this reveals to me, and I think to us, that Mary knew Jesus was extraordinary. Obviously, the angelic encounter she had, the virgin birth, watching him teach and grow up, and countless other stories that we don't have recorded led her to a place where she believed that Jesus is who God said he would be, and that he can provide a solution to this problem. And so this is the first thing that I notice in this story, that Mary has confidence that Jesus is the solution to what seems like a significant problem. Now, allow me just to pause for a moment and give a little bit of cultural background that we may not be able to see or connect with if we're looking at this from like Western individualistic eyes. First of all, the wedding ceremonies lasted about 7 days at that time. So you need to get the little Saturday afternoon wedding in a barn out of your mind. This is much bigger than that. Weddings also included these large celebratory feasts that were more than just providing a meal for guests. They were extremely important culturally. These feasts would have brought honor to the host and to the couple that day or throughout the ceremony. Additionally, this culture is and was very family-oriented, meaning it's not just about the couple being married, but it's about these two families who are coming together. So it's important for us to understand in this story that it's not just like a Western love story where two people meet and one asks the other out to a really nice romantic evening of bowling, to which they bring their sister, and then they later watch The Notebook as friends, and then they end up getting married. It was about these two family systems coming together. And so a lack of wine would have been incredibly shameful and embarrassing. It would have lost status for the families. Additionally, this is an honor-shame culture, meaning a mistake like this would have brought shame on the families and those that were hosting beyond just the wedding. It would have carried with them from this point forward. So this running out of wine was more than just a simple oversight. It had great implications socially. And so this is why Mary is so concerned, because she wants to serve and care for the needs of those who are hosting this wedding. And so in the midst of this great crisis, Mary knows that she needs to go to Jesus. And as we read, he's hesitant at first. And based on this language where he talks about, he says, "Woman, why are you involving me?" He's not trying to be disrespectful or dismissive of Mary, but rather it seems like he's maybe trying to create some distance to show her and others that he's going to follow the will of the Father first and foremost. But even in the midst of this kind of distance that he creates, she tells the servants, "Do whatever he tells you to do." And I love her response, because someone who doesn't have confidence like she has here is not going to tell the servants to do this. She might have pled with him or begged Jesus to do something more, but instead she just says, "Do whatever he tells you to do." She has this confidence in Jesus, and rightfully so. She has confidence that he will intervene, and she has confidence that he has the power to do something about it and also the compassion to act. And so this is the first point that I see in this story, that Mary has interacted with Jesus enough to know how much he cares and how capable he is to solve this problem at hand. And so as we walk with Jesus, we may not understand everything he does and the ways and the timing in which he does it, but I do believe that the more we walk with Jesus, the more we see his character, the more we understand his power, and the more we see his love, the more we see his compassion, the more I believe we'll trust him. The second group then I want us to look at is this group of servants, and I'll say that their encounter leads to extravagant value. So this group of unnamed servants have simply been told to do whatever Jesus tells them to do. So there's these 6 large stone water jars, and Jesus tells them to fill them with water. They do this, and they are sitting there firsthand watching something absolutely incredible happen. And the thing that moves me so deeply about this part of the story is that it's the servants who are the ones that get to witness firsthand the supernatural miracle take place. It's not the important people of the party. It's not the master of ceremonies. It's not the bride and groom or even the families, but rather it's the servants who firsthand get to see water go in and wine come out. And so it reminds me of the birth of Jesus, where it's the shepherds who are out in the fields who receive the angelic announcement of the birth of Jesus. And so time and time again, it just seems like Jesus goes to the lower in society to reveal himself, his power, his character, his presence, and his love. And so it reminds me that the hope that we have in Jesus is for all people. The servants are the ones who witness this miracle. They know more of what's happened and what's taken place than the master of the ceremony. And just imagine for them, they're there listening, and they get to hear the words of the master who says, everyone sets out the fine wine first. Then, after people are drunk, the inferior. But you kept the fine wine until now. And so I can just imagine the master of ceremony is just amazed at the taste of this incredible wine. And I just imagine him saying something like, I'm just tasting like floral notes of dried petals, and were these like dried on the Galilean hills in the sun? And the servants are just like giggling, and they're like, dude, it's water. Like, what kind of sommelier are you? But here's my point. The servants are the ones who get to see this firsthand. Oftentimes, it's those that society would overlook that Jesus reveals himself to first. And so it's this extravagant sense of purpose and value placed on the servants that I see in this story. They're literally the ones that get to carry this miracle. So as I read this about Mary, and as I read this about the servants, I feel like I'm beginning to see more and more of why John is including this story at the beginning of this journey for us to read about and discover that Jesus is the Messiah and that he is the one that brings life. Then the last group I just want to look at briefly are these disciples. The disciples, and I'll say their encounter leads to extravagant belief. Now, the disciples aren't mentioned a whole lot in the story. They're just kind of at the beginning, that they're there at the party, and then at the end. It almost feels like, to me, it's like a lifeguard and Olympic swimming competition. Like, we know they're there, but we're not quite sure what they're really doing. But the last sentence reveals a lot to us. In verse 11, it says, Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. Likely at this point, he didn't have all 12 disciples yet. There may have only been about 5 or so. But this moment is huge. They saw this interaction with Mary that Jesus had. They witnessed the servants pouring water in. They heard in amazement as the wine was fantastic. And John indicates that all of this happened so that they would believe in Jesus because they saw his glory. They believed that Jesus was the Messiah, and then as they believed in him, they experienced life. So just for a moment, immerse yourself in this story. The disciples are there. They're hanging out. They're dancing. They're doing the electric slide. Peter's like, Thomas, I think they're going to play the Love Shack soon. And Thomas is like, I doubt it. And the rest of them are like nervously looking around, trying to see who they should ask to dance when that Ed Sheeran song comes on. They're having this like great time, and then they hear this issue that the wine is running out. I mean, just imagine this, what they're experiencing, and then all of a sudden, the party is back on, everything's going well again. Why? Because of Jesus, the one that they have chosen to follow. Surely this man is different. Surely this man is the Messiah. And so looking at the disciples, I think we can see how encountering Jesus helps to foster belief in him. So the more you read this book of John this summer about Jesus, the more you learn about him, the more you examine his life, the more you listen to his words, the more you watch how he interacts and encounters people, I trust the more that you will believe in him. It's so easy for us to get our eyes off Jesus and onto other things that can really erode our beliefs. There's very real pressures in this world. There's conflicts within the church. People, churches, institutions can disappoint us. And those are very real things that need to be processed. But what I want us to do is just to step back. I want to just invite you to step back for a moment and look at the true Jesus in this story that we've just read. This is the one that meets the needs of the family in this profound way. The one that elevates the servants. The one that will, in stories to come, will heal, will die, and will resurrect. I invite you to do what the disciples did, to follow him, to watch him, to spend time with him and allow him to increase your belief. Sometimes I find myself in that place where things may be hard and I'm asking questions and I'm praying that prayer of like, Lord, just help me in my unbelief. And oftentimes just spending time focusing on Jesus, like stories like this, can really help me. I know that may seem very simple, but sometimes I feel like it's that simple step of faith and looking at Jesus that can blossom into deep belief. So I just encourage you to start by just reading this scripture again this week. But maybe even think about it in different ways and engage with it in different ways. If you enjoy art, perhaps try to paint or draw a portion of this story that sticks out to you. Maybe if you enjoy music, like write a song or sing a song or just play instrumentally in response to what you're seeing happen in this story. If you like writing, journal your thoughts and observations and questions and engage more deeply with it. If you like learning, read commentaries, engage with things that way. Pray about it. Or if you're relational, maybe talk with others about this story the way you would talk with your friends about a great movie or a book. And see as you engage with the story in some different ways if your belief does not grow. So in summary, there's these three main people or groups that we looked at this morning. We saw Mary, who had this confidence based on who she knew Jesus to be. We see the servants who are valued and elevated, and I can only imagine we're just amazed at what they got to be a part of. And we see the disciples who respond in belief. Each is giving like a different response based on where they were at in their relationship with Jesus. I guess we could say like it's how they took their next step towards Christ. So this act of turning water into wine was absolutely extraordinary and extravagant. It went beyond what was necessary. If Jesus had done nothing because it was too early for his power to be revealed, it would have been understandable. If he had chosen to bring the master of the ceremonies to a back room to show him the wine rather than the servants, like that would have made a lot of sense. If he would have made just cheap, bottom shelf type wine, it would have been more than enough and we would have understood why. If he would have just made a little bit of wine to prolong it so they could have time to buy more, it would have been understandable, but that's not what happens in the story. He responds to the request. He removes shame and replaces it with incredible honor. He pours out not just wine, but the best wine. He reveals himself and his glory to the disciples and to others, and the whole thing feels absolutely extravagant. I mentioned earlier how I can sometimes feel uncomfortable when things are extravagant. And I think that's because there's a big piece of me that feels more at ease or more comfortable if things are just normal or understandable. In other words, if there was lesser wine or not as much, or if they were just able to go buy more. Because I think the reality is, if I'm honest, it's because that would feel more like a success story based on perseverance or self-sufficiency rather than on a miracle of God. And so it can feel more comfortable sometimes to place myself at the center, but that's not who's at the center of this story. It's Jesus who's at the center of the story. And it's John is showing us who he is and to reveal his love and extravagance to us. Yeah. Also, I noticed that no one did anything to earn this new wine. Other than Mary kind of sharing the request, the servants, following what Jesus said and the disciples believing, it wasn't their effort or their action or their right whatever that made this all come about. It was provided to pour out a blessing on honor on all that were a part of the wedding that day. So when I was a kid, I was just 5 years old, so maybe like 20 years ago or so. Our family drove from Pennsylvania down to Orlando, and this was before they invented planes, in case you're wondering why we drove that far. So we spent some time at Disney for a week, and I don't remember a whole lot about what happened that week, but there's one scene that really sticks out to me. So throughout the time there, I must have seen like a toy in a gift shop. And I wanted this toy so bad. So at dinner that night, my parents made a deal with me. They said, if you can just finish your dinner, you can have the toy, and we'll get this toy for you. Now, I was an extremely picky eater as a young child, and so finishing a meal for me was a pretty monumental task, which is why they asked this of me. Well, that night, I think I was maybe just a little too worked up or whatever it was, and I couldn't finish my meal. And I felt like really ashamed. I felt frustrated, and I was really just disappointed in what was going on. Because now I couldn't get the reward. All I had to do was to finish this meal, and now I wasn't able to get the toy. And so I remember like crying on a park bench under a street lamp. And I feel like Disney could probably turn this into some kind of heartwarming tale. But I'll never forget like seeing my dad come around from behind the bench with this toy that I wanted. I was so happy. I played with it for a solid like 2 minutes and then never thought about it again, which is what 5-year-olds do. But while I may forget the toy, like I'll never forget this gesture. The reality is I didn't deserve it. I didn't deserve to get the toy. I didn't deserve that. I didn't do what was required of me that day. And yet I still received the gift. And I was shown grace that day. And I think I got a much bigger lesson that day that has stuck with me much longer than a simple toy. It can oftentimes feel like we don't deserve what's best because we didn't do enough, or we didn't do the right thing. We can feel like we just want the minimum or just want what's comfortable because that's what we can know. We can feel uncomfortable with what's extravagant and the kind of love that we see Jesus pouring out. But that's not how grace works. Grace is God's undeserved favor. It's extravagant. It's amazing. And it's incredible. So perhaps today you're going through a really hard season. Maybe you're dealing with like news that you really wish you didn't have to deal with. Maybe like a certain health diagnosis, or parenting has just felt really overwhelming. Maybe you're walking through some financial difficulty, or your job is just going hard and just feels like a disappointment. Maybe everything in your house is breaking and your 5-year plan hasn't even hit your first-year goal, but you're actually in year 7 of the plan. What if you could approach Jesus the way Mary did, with confidence and trust? Perhaps today this story can remind you of his character and invites you to try to approach him in prayer with more confidence. Maybe today you're feeling a little overlooked. You don't feel known or seen in your relationships, in your marriage, or in your job. And you just want to be seen. You want to be valued. You want to be loved. Perhaps today as you look at this story, you see the servants and you find hope. Right? Maybe you can remember the truth of who Jesus is and who he says you are. That you matter to him, that you have value, that you can have life as you believe and trust in him. Perhaps today you come in and your faith is shaken. Church has let you down, or your Christian family hasn't always acted so Christian. Maybe you're asking questions that you never thought you were even allowed to ask before. If so, maybe today you want to just take some time and focus on the life of Jesus this morning. Over this series, I invite you to focus in on these encounters to see if Jesus can increase your belief. Perhaps this morning you just want to pray and ask Jesus to help you in your unbelief and in your time of questions. So to Mary's confidence and request, he responds and does the miraculous by bringing restoration to the party. To the servants' lowliness, he values them, invites them to see what only he can do, and he elevates them. To the disciples who have left their lives behind to follow him, he gives assurance that he is the Messiah and that he is life. And he does all of this not because of what they have done, but because of who he is. So this morning, we're going to have our prayer team on either side of the auditorium. And this morning, if you need more confidence, if you need to feel a sense of value, or if you need to increase in your belief in this more extravagant way, I encourage you to go and to receive prayer this morning from one of those in our prayer team. I'm just going to pray, and then we'll take a moment and just reflect and pray about what you see in this story, about the ways that you encounter Jesus. And of course, if you need prayer, please go to those on the sides. God, we just thank you so much for your gospel. I thank you for stories like this that can teach and reveal to us who you are, your extravagant love, the ways you interact in this way, in this social setting, and bless all that are there at this party. And God, this morning, no matter where we are, I ask that we would encounter you in a fresh way, and that you would increase our confidence, that you would restore our value, and you would help us in our belief. We thank you so much for who you are and the testimony of your word. In your name, amen. Spend some time praying.